On a seemingly normal day in 1955, Pan Am Flight 914 took off from New York, packed with passengers and crew, all ready to land in sunny Miami.
For decades, the Pan Am Flight 914 was a tragic disappearance hidden in aviation's dark history. It was that 1955 incident that sent chills down the spine of anyone who heard it. But even more shocking are the reports that came 37 years later. The plane that took off from New York in 1955 was said to have landed in Venezuela 37 years later, and the passengers still believed it was 1955. It makes us wonder, was the plane lost in time? Fasten your seatbelts as we dive through this mind-blowing ride. When Pan American World Airways announced a routine flight from New York to Miami on July 2, 1955, nothing about it sounded unusual. Pan Am was one of the biggest names in aviation at the time, known for its international routes, modern aircraft, and reputation for safety. Flight 914 was scheduled to cover a relatively short trip down the East Coast, carrying 57 passengers and a crew of 4. Families boarded, business travelers settled in, and at 9:55 a.m., the aircraft lifted off from New York's LaGuardia Airport. What was supposed to be a simple journey of just under 3 hours would soon become one of the most baffling aviation mysteries ever told. Somewhere between takeoff and its expected arrival in Miami, Flight 914 simply vanished. Air traffic controllers lost contact, but still, they couldn't get hold of a distress call. There was neither a radar signal or any sign of trouble. Hours passed, and when the plane did not land on schedule, the alarm was raised. Search operations were launched over the Atlantic Ocean and along the flight path, but nothing turned up. There was no floating debris or any sign of an accident, leaving investigators confused. It looked as if the plane had evaporated into thin air. The disappearance made headlines immediately. In the 1950s, commercial air travel was still relatively new to the public, and the idea that a large passenger jet could vanish without explanation was shocking. Newspapers across the country reported the incident, speculating on possible causes. Some suggested catastrophic engine failure, while others leaned toward a crash at sea. Families of the missing demanded answers, but officials had little to offer. With no evidence to recover, the case was quietly filed away, adding to the growing list of unexplained disappearances in aviation history. For Pan Am, the loss was devastating. It was more than a missing aircraft. It was a blow to public confidence in a brand that symbolized progress and modernity. The airline, along with investigators, treated it as a tragic accident, even without proof. The passengers and crew were declared dead, and the story faded into the background as new headlines took over. But for many, the mystery refused to die. Aviation enthusiasts, conspiracy theorists, and grieving families kept the memory alive. Over the years, whispers and theories continued to circulate. Some believed the flight had gone down in the Bermuda Triangle, a region already notorious for strange disappearances. Others claimed it had been hijacked or lost in bad weather. Yet, the lack of wreckage remained the most unsettling detail. Even in the most catastrophic crashes, something is usually left behind. With Flight 914, there was absolutely nothing. As the years turned into decades, the story was slowly buried under other aviation tragedies. But then, long after people had stopped asking questions, new claims surfaced. Reports began to circulate that the lost Pan Am flight had suddenly reappeared, not in the 1950s, but decades later, in an airport thousands of miles away. And that's where the story takes a turn no one could have predicted. The reappearance. By the early 1990s, Pan Am Flight 914 had long been filed away as a cold case. For most, it was a forgotten tragedy of the 1950s, just another unexplained loss in aviation history. But in 1992, a shocking claim began to circulate that would catapult the story back into headlines and fuel decades of speculation. According to reports, the same plane that vanished in 1955 suddenly reappeared out of nowhere in Caracas, Venezuela, as if no time had passed at all. The alleged incident began when Venezuelan air traffic controllers at Caracas's Simón Bolívar International Airport picked up an unexpected radar contact. At first, nothing seemed extraordinary. Unidentified flights occasionally appeared without notice, usually small aircraft straying from their flight path. But this radar blip was different. It was large, moving steadily, and heading directly toward the airport. Controllers immediately tried to establish communication. The story goes that when the pilot of the mysterious aircraft finally responded, the details left the control tower in disbelief. The captain identified his flight as Pan Am Flight 914 from New York to Miami, carrying 57 passengers. He then reportedly asked, "Where are we? What is going on?" For the Venezuelan controllers, the information made no sense. The flight number matched a plane that had vanished without a trace 37 years earlier. At first, they assumed there must be some misunderstanding, perhaps a pilot using an outdated flight code. But when the aircraft drew closer and eventually made a safe landing, the confusion only deepened. According to the reports, the plane that rolled down the runway looked nothing like a modern airliner of the 1990s. It was an old Douglas DC-4, the same model used on that original 1955 route. Even more unsettling, the passengers and crew appeared just as they would have in the 1950s. Dressed in mid-century fashion, clutching vintage suitcases, and speaking as if no time had passed. Witnesses claimed the travelers were visibly confused, asking why it was so hot in Miami and why the calendar on the wall read 1992. The captain, realizing something was terribly wrong, allegedly refused to let anyone disembark. He told controllers and ground crew that his passengers were not prepared for what was happening. Before officials could secure the situation, the story claims, the engines roared back to life. The plane taxied to the runway and, against all orders, took off again, disappearing into the sky and never to be seen again. This dramatic sequence, sudden arrival, confusion, refusal to disembark, and abrupt departure, became the core of the Flight 914 legend. Newspapers and tabloids quickly picked up the story, running sensational headlines about a ghost plane that had reappeared after nearly 4 decades. The details varied depending on the retelling, but the essential elements remained. An airliner from 1955 had resurfaced in 1992, with its crew and passengers unaware that time had moved on. What made the rumor so powerful was the detail about the passengers. According to the tale, they were still convinced it was July 2nd, 1955. To them, no time had passed at all. They asked simple questions like, "Why are we in Venezuela?" Or, "Why does the calendar say 1992? It was as if the flight had entered some hidden corridor of time, skipping nearly 4 decades before dropping back into reality. The idea was irresistible. People speculated endlessly about what could explain such a phenomenon. Some believed it was evidence of time travel, that Flight 914 had slipped into a time warp and emerged years later, unchanged. Others pointed to secret government experiments, suggesting the plane had been caught in a classified project that went wrong. For conspiracy theorists, it was proof that authorities were hiding far more than they admitted. But just as quickly as the rumor appeared, it was met with skepticism. No official aviation record confirmed such an event in Caracas. Pan Am itself never acknowledged the reappearance story, and airport logs did not show any mysterious unscheduled landings in 1992. Critics pointed out that such a dramatic incident would have left behind far more evidence, like eyewitness photos, official reports, or international news coverage at the time. Instead, the story mainly spread through tabloids and later through the rise of internet forums, where it became a favorite topic of mystery hunters. Still, the legend grew. One detail that made it so enduring was the supposed testimony of air traffic controllers. In some versions, a controller named Juan de la Corte was cited as a witness who confirmed the strange landing. His name appeared in articles and retellings as the man who first spoke with the bewildered pilot. Yet when researchers tried to verify his identity, there was no official record of such a person employed at the Caracas airport in 1992. That didn't stop the rumor mill. In fact, it only fueled the belief that details were being covered up. For families of the original passengers, the rumor brought back painful memories. Many had spent years trying to accept that their loved ones were gone, only to see their names resurface in bizarre stories about time travel and ghost flights. Some dismissed the tale as disrespectful, while others clung to the possibility that there was a shred of truth behind it. The media's role in amplifying the legend can't be ignored. In the 1990s, sensational tabloids thrived on stories that blurred the line between fact and fiction. The reappearance of Flight 914 was the perfect kind of tale. Dramatic, eerie, and impossible to fully prove or disprove. As the internet became more widespread, the story took on new life in online forums, YouTube videos, and paranormal blogs. Each retelling added new details, sometimes changing the date of reappearance, sometimes moving the location, but always keeping the same shocking core. The plane that vanished in 1955 had returned decades later. What makes the Flight 914 story so unique is the emotional hook. Unlike many aviation mysteries, this one offers not just loss, but a supposed second chance. A plane full of people returning long after they were presumed dead. That detail made it unforgettable, even if experts consistently labeled it a hoax. For believers, it was proof that the universe still held secrets. For skeptics, it was a case study in how myths are born and spread. Whether fact or fiction, the legend of Flight 914's reappearance became the defining climax of the entire mystery. The disappearance in 1955 was strange enough, but the claim that the same aircraft resurfaced in 1992 elevated it into one of the most retold aviation stories of all time. And just like that, the mystery was no longer about what happened in 1955. It became about what supposedly happened in 1992 and why the world never got a clear explanation. But then theories began to pop up. And the mystery, was it brought to light or more mysterious? Let's find out. The theories and explanations. When the alleged reappearance of Pan Am Flight 914 in 1992 made its way into newspapers and eventually the internet, the story exploded with possibilities. If true, it would have been one of the greatest mysteries in aviation history. But because there was never any official confirmation, the rumors instead gave birth to a storm of theories. Each one tried to make sense of how a plane could vanish for nearly 4 decades, only to suddenly reappear as if no time had passed. Some explanations were wild, others surprisingly rational, but all of them fed into the legend. The most popular explanation that caught the imagination of the public was time travel. If the reports were to be believed, the passengers and crew of Flight 914 had no awareness that 37 years had passed. They behaved as though it was still July 2nd, 1955. For believers, this was undeniable proof that the plane had somehow traveled through time. Supporters of this theory suggested that the aircraft had flown into a time slip, a concept often found in science fiction. A time slip is described as a natural or accidental portal that transports people from one point in time to another. Some linked this to Einstein's theories of relativity, pointing to the possibility that space and time could bend under unusual conditions. Of course, no evidence has ever supported this happening to an aircraft, but for conspiracy theorists, Flight 914 was the ultimate example. The details of the story seemed to fit the time travel angle perfectly. The passengers were unchanged, vintage luggage, and a plane that looked like it had just taken off in the 1950s. If it had been a hoax, people argued, why include such specific details? To this day, the time travel explanation remains the most commonly repeated version of the legend. Another theory tied Flight 914 to the infamous Bermuda Triangle. Though the flight path from New York to Miami does not cross the core of the Bermuda Triangle, it passes close enough for people to make a connection. By the 1960s and 1970s, the Bermuda Triangle had already gained worldwide notoriety for stories of ships and planes disappearing without explanation. Books and television programs popularized the idea that the region was cursed or home to some unexplained natural phenomenon. For believers in this angle, Flight 914's disappearance was simply another Bermuda Triangle case. The difference was that, unlike other disappearances, This one allegedly had a reappearance. The theory goes that the aircraft was somehow pulled into the triangle's mysterious vortex in 1955 and then spit out in Venezuela in 1992. Scientists have long dismissed the Bermuda Triangle as a myth, pointing out that the number of incidents there is no higher than anywhere else in the world, with heavy maritime and aviation traffic. But in the public imagination, the triangle remains a perfect scapegoat for bizarre vanishings. Linking Flight 914 to it gave the story even more traction. In the 1990s, as science fiction gained more mainstream popularity, a new wave of explanations emerged: the idea of parallel dimensions. According to this theory, Flight 914 didn't simply disappear. It slipped into a different dimension or reality. Proponents claimed that in some parallel universe, the flight landed safely in Miami, while in ours, it was missing for nearly 40 years. This theory borrowed heavily from speculative physics, particularly ideas about the multiverse. Though there's no scientific proof that people or objects can cross into parallel dimensions, the concept made sense to those searching for answers. The fact that the passengers reportedly believed it was still 1955 supported the idea. They had never left their timeline, but instead reappeared in ours decades later. While fringe, this explanation captured the imagination of readers who were familiar with shows like The Twilight Zone and later The X-Files. Flight 914 became a prime example cited whenever discussions about alternate realities arose. Another major explanation focused on secrecy and government involvement. The Cold War era was full of classified projects and conspiracy theories about hidden technology. For some, the idea that an entire plane could vanish pointed directly to government experiments. One version suggested that the U.S. military had been testing radar-evading technology or teleportation experiments in the 1950s. According to this view, Flight 914 accidentally became part of a secret project, disappearing because of a botched trial. Its sudden reappearance decades later was seen as evidence that something had gone wrong, and then was quickly covered up. Supporters of this theory pointed to inconsistencies in the reports. Why was there no official record of the reappearance in Venezuela? Why did Pan Am never make a statement if their missing plane had supposedly returned? For conspiracy theorists, the silence was not proof that the story was fake. It was proof that the truth was being deliberately hidden. The government cover-up angle also tied into broader distrust of authority, especially in the wake of scandals like Watergate and classified projects that were revealed years after the fact. If governments could hide nuclear tests and covert wars, why not a mysterious time-warping aircraft? Of all the explanations, the hoax theory is the one most historians and aviation experts accept. Evidence suggests that the story first gained traction in a 1985 issue of the tabloid magazine Weekly World News, a publication famous for printing sensational, often fabricated stories. The magazine was known for mixing fact with fiction, presenting wild tales alongside real news in ways that blurred the lines for casual readers. According to researchers who traced the origin of the Flight 914 legend, the Caracas landing story first appeared in Weekly World News and was later reprinted in various tabloids through the 1990s. Over time, the details were expanded and rephrased, especially once the internet allowed the story to spread globally. Skeptics point out that there are no official aviation records confirming the 1992 event, no verified eyewitnesses beyond names invented by tabloids, and no photographic evidence. For something as dramatic as a 1950s plane landing in a busy airport, the lack of solid proof is telling. Still, the hoax explanation doesn't erase the power of the story. Even if Weekly World News created it, the narrative resonated with readers because it played into universal fears and fascinations, disappearing without a trace, time moving differently, and the possibility that the world is stranger than we know. Regardless of which theory one believes, there's no denying the role media played in keeping the Flight 914 legend alive. Tabloid culture in the 1980s and 1990s thrived on sensational mysteries. Stories like this weren't expected to be verified. They were expected to sell. Once published, the Flight 914 reappearance tale fit perfectly into TV specials about mysteries, paranormal documentaries, and eventually viral internet content. By the 2000s, YouTube channels, blogs, and forums had adopted the story, often retelling it with dramatic animations or supposed eyewitness interviews. Each version changed small details, but the core remained. A plane vanished in 1955 and resurfaced decades later. For many, encountering the story online made it feel more credible, even though it originated in tabloids. The staying power of the Flight 914 legend is beyond aviation mystery. It's about psychology. People are drawn to mysteries that can't be fully explained. Unlike a normal crash, which ends in tragedy, this story offers an unsettling possibility that the missing might still be alive somewhere. For some, the theories offer comfort. Time travel, parallel dimensions, or even government secrets at least suggest that the passengers didn't suffer. For others, the story is a way of questioning reality itself. Because if something like this could happen, what else is possible? But the aftermath of this shocking mystery is more thrilling. Let's dive in. The aftermath. The first major aftershock of the Flight 914 rumor was its recycling across tabloid culture throughout the 1990s. Once Weekly World News printed the story, it didn't remain confined to one issue. Other tabloids picked it up, reshaped it, and republished it with slight variations. In some retellings, the reappearance happened in the 1980s instead of 1992. In others, the landing took place not only in Caracas, but in different Latin American airports. The story mutated with each retelling, but the core remained unchanged. A missing flight suddenly returning decades later. Tabloids thrived on stories that blurred fact and fiction. Readers weren't always expected to believe every word. The stories were designed to shock, entertain, and spark the thrill of asking, "What if?" Flight 914's narrative fit perfectly into this mold. Even when skeptics pointed out holes and inconsistencies, the lack of clear answers only made the mystery seem bigger. In fact, debunking sometimes fueled the intrigue. If it was purely a made-up tale, why did the details feel so specific? That question kept readers hooked. By the time the story began spreading again, Pan Am itself had already shut down. The airline ceased operations in 1991, right before the Flight 914 legend found new traction. This timing created an odd effect. Pan Am's silence on the matter was not surprising, because there was no functioning company left to respond. For believers, this was convenient. It meant there was no official voice to dismiss the claim. For skeptics, it underlined the point that no recognized aviation body had ever supported the rumor. Pan Am's reputation added weight to the legend. In its prime, the airline was a symbol of modern air travel. It represented international prestige, cutting-edge aviation, and a touch of glamour. Its blue globe logo, its uniformed flight attendants, and its reputation for connecting continents gave the brand an aura of importance. That image became part of why the story stuck. If a legendary airline like Pan Am could be involved in such a bizarre tale, it felt big enough to capture attention. The rise of television mysteries in the late 1980s and 1990s pushed the legend even further. Programs such as Unsolved Mysteries and Sightings popularized the format of retelling strange disappearances, paranormal claims, and unexplained events with serious narration and dramatic reenactments. While not every show directly featured Flight 914, the style of storytelling created the perfect environment for audiences to be receptive. Aviation mystery documentaries began including the story of Flight 914, alongside other infamous disappearances such as Amelia Earhart's final flight, or the losses blamed on the Bermuda Triangle. Even with disclaimers, presenting it in this way gave the story a sense of credibility. When viewers saw it treated in the same manner as real cases, it was easier for them to suspend disbelief. By the early 2000s, the internet had transformed how legends spread. Flight 914 entered a new era as forums, blogs, And eventually YouTube made it easier than ever for stories to circulate. Websites dedicated to mysteries highlighted it as one of the great unexplained aviation events. Message boards had lengthy threads debating whether the reappearance had truly occurred or whether it was an elaborate hoax. On YouTube, videos retelling the story gained millions of views. Some were animated summaries presented as fact, while others framed the story as speculation. Titles like "The Plane That Disappeared in 1955 and Landed in 1992" drew in curious viewers who wanted to know more. Younger generations, who had never seen the tabloid headlines of the 1990s, encountered the story online for the first time and treated it as new. Social media gave the legend an even longer life. Posts on Facebook, Reddit, and later TikTok often resurfaced the story in short, dramatic summaries designed to grab attention. Accuracy mattered less than shock value. A quick line about a plane that disappeared and landed 37 years later was enough to spark debates in the comment sections. Once again, the story reached millions of people, long after it had first appeared. The growth of the internet also allowed skeptics to organize and publish fact checks. Aviation historians and journalists began pointing out that the story traced back to a tabloid known for fabrications. Websites like Snopes explained why there was no evidence to support the claim. For many, this was enough to dismiss the legend entirely. Yet debunking didn't kill it. In some corners of the internet, debunking only reinforced the idea that the truth was being hidden. Believers argued that if authorities or mainstream outlets were so quick to deny the story, perhaps they were covering something up. This dynamic, where every denial is interpreted as proof of suppression, is common in conspiracy culture and kept the Flight 914 legend alive. The persistence of the story is also tied to humanity's wider fascination with aviation mysteries. Airplanes represent power, progress, and safety. But when one disappears without explanation, the sense of control is shattered. People want answers, and when answers don't exist, myths fill the gap. Flight 914 joined the ranks of other cases where the official record couldn't provide closure. The disappearance of Malaysian Airlines Flight MH370 in 2014 reignited discussions of Flight 914. Whenever a new aviation mystery emerges, older ones return to public conversation as comparisons. The thought that planes can vanish without explanation makes people reconsider whether legends like Flight 914 might hold some truth. The influence of the story has also been felt in entertainment. Shows and films exploring sudden reappearances and time anomalies often echo the details of the Flight 914 legend. Science fiction series such as The Twilight Zone and later Manifest use similar premises, where passengers vanish and later return unchanged, unaware of the years that have passed. Even when not directly credited, these stories borrow from the same cultural blueprint, reinforcing the sense of confusion and disbelief that the legend created. Within conspiracy communities, Flight 914 has become a fixture. The story connects neatly with themes already popular in those circles: secret government experiments, time slips, and hidden knowledge. Some even merge it with other conspiracies, suggesting connections to the Philadelphia experiment, a supposed U.S. Navy project involving teleportation and invisibility. Although historians dismiss these links, the overlap of myths creates a broader web that thrives in online spaces where skepticism is low and speculation is welcome. What makes the Flight 914 legend so enduring is that it combines several emotional hooks. The mystery itself is compelling because the details are bizarre and incomplete. Unlike most aviation tragedies, the legend leaves room for hope, suggesting that passengers did not die but continued to exist elsewhere. At the same time, the idea that a routine flight could vanish and reappear decades later introduces a layer of fear. People begin to imagine what it would mean if something similar could happen today. Academics and psychologists have taken interest in Flight 914, not because of its factual accuracy, but because of how it has survived. The legend is often studied as an example of modern folklore, showing how stories evolve and persist in a digital age. It reveals how people process loss, and unexplained events by reaching for extraordinary explanations rather than accepting uncertainty. A vanished plane is frightening enough, but a story about time travel or a secret project gives the mind a narrative to hold on to. Even in 2020s, the story refuses to fade. TikTok creators package it into short videos with dramatic voiceovers, while YouTube channels continue to produce hour-long documentaries claiming to reveal hidden truths. For some viewers, it is pure entertainment. For others, it remains a tantalizing question. The internet has ensured that the Flight 914 legend is effectively immortal. It now matters less whether the event actually occurred and more what it represents about our fascination with the unexplained. The aftermath of the Flight 914 rumor demonstrates how a single story can outlive the context that created it. The plane may never have landed in Caracas, but in the public imagination, it did. That, more than anything else, explains why the legend remains part of cultural discussions decades later. People are fascinated by the possibility of time slipping. They are wowed by journeys that don't follow the rules of reality. They moved by stories that refuse to die even when proven false. The Flight 914 tale is less about aviation and more about the power of belief. Each time it resurfaces, it raises the same question. What if it really happened? That doubt, however small, keeps the myth alive. And as long as people remain drawn to mysteries that challenge logic, Pan Am Flight 914 will continue to fly through conversations, if not the skies. But do you think Pan Am Flight 914 could have actually been a plane lost in time? Or was it just one of the biggest aviation hoaxes ever told? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this ride, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories. We'll see you in the next video.